We are very pleased to have here with us today Ambassador Carstens. Ambassador Carstens served as a special presidential envoy for hostages affair from 2020 to 2025 under the Trump and the Biden administration at the United States Department of State. During this, led negotiation with the Taliban, with the Assad regime in Syria, Russia, Belarus, China, Venezuela, and with terror organizations such as Haqqani Network in Afghanistan, Houthis in Yemen, and Jenim in Mali, managed to bring back home from captivity 65 American hostages and unlawful detainees during his mission. And maybe before neglected to say that also serve at the 1st Ranger Battalion and Special Forces, and today is aside of being a senior fellow, distinguished senior fellow at McCain Institute, also a distinguished member of the Special Forces Regiment. So thank you for being here with us today, Ambassador Carstens. Thank you for years of tireless and professional effort helping the vulnerable around the globe, and thank you for your comradeship.
Thank you very much. If I can say thank you, first off, thank you, Lior, for inviting me as the Sheleg Chair for Crisis Management and Research. I'd like to thank my good friend Boaz Ganor, Professor Ganor, for inviting me as well as Reichman University. You and I have known each other since 2022, before October 7, 2023, when I came over here so that I could learn from you and your experience of negotiation to help me better do my job back in the United States. So we knew each other before October 7th. And I remember last time we were here, you and I were on this stage not too long ago, about a year or so ago, and we noticed that yellow chair over there, and you and I both commented specifically how that chair to us that day represented the student Idan Shtativi, who was at Reichman University. At that time, we were unclear on what had happened to him. The very next day after you and I were on stage, we found out, sadly, that Idan had been killed on October 7th, that his body had been taken back into Gaza and had been held in captivity. And Hamas cruelly would call his family and tell them that he was alive. And that shows you the enemy that we're fighting. It shows you the psychological terror that they're willing to visit upon the citizens of Israel and those that were taken hostage. Idan's body was recovered not too long ago, and he was laid to rest. And that's the kind of closure that every family of someone who was slain in Gaza deserves, and every hostage who is currently alive in Gaza needs to come home, all 48. And I'm grateful that we have a chance to talk about these topics on the stage before you today.
Thank you for this. Of course, we'll talk about Gaza issue, but before that, even before October 7, and no doubt that after it, we can identify this sharp rise in the phenomena, in the trends of hostage taking by terror organization and wrongful detainees held by state. Do you think that this will continue or fade away?
So I would agree with what you wrote. You wrote many years ago that this phenomena was going to increase, and I think you were spot on, that you were correct. The good news, if there's any good news in this, is that though it's starting to increase, whether it's nation-state or terrorist groups, finally, after 4,500 years of recorded history in this field, the civilized societies are getting together to try to thwart it. So if you were to go back in the days of the Torah, the Bible, the Iliad, Herodotus, Thucydides, you'll read about these hostage crises that took place between nation-states or terrorist groups. And after all this time, the terrorist or the nation-state would usually go to nation-states like the United States and leverage them. The Canadians leverage them. The Israelis and leverage them, and so on and so forth. Finally, and in great part because of, sadly, what happened in Gaza, the civilized nations are starting to come together, coordinate better, and I would say offering a prevention and deterrence strategy that will one day allow us to get ahead, to jump ahead of the enemy, and to outthink them, out-organize them, and outwork them, and to hopefully one day put at least the nation-state side to rest. However, is it ever going to go away? Of course not.
So no doubt we are on a path of doing a better job confronting this threat. But what are the crucial, or the urgent challenges that we need as a community, as an international community, to overcome in order to be more efficient?
So I would offer, and I'd be curious to what you think, because you study this too. Here's what I would offer. Right now, again, it's not perfect, but right now we're in a place where there are now multinational efforts to combat both the hostage side. Hostage, let's say we define that as a terrorist group taking a citizen, and arbitrary detention or wrongful detention, or a nation state, like, for example, Russia or Iran taking a citizen. We've become so much better. I think Gal Hirsch has done a great job of pulling together about 7 or 8 countries in kind of an ad hoc task force that he meets with regularly to talk about the citizens of their countries. That was actually a positive step. There was a time before Gaza where I would go to another country and say, hey, who's your hostage representative? And I couldn't find that person. I would go through the wiring diagrams, I'd work the emails, make the phone calls. I had no clue who my counterpart was. And then Gaza happened, and suddenly, bam, some of these points of contact would pop up. But what you realize is not every country has one. But we're getting better at that. I would say like Australia now has one, Germany has one, Canada has one, you've had one for many years, we have one. There's a point of contact, a belly button, if you will, for a family to reach into the government should their loved one be taken, or someone from another country to call in and connect. So if, for instance, if I need to talk to someone in the Canadian government now, I know exactly who I need to call. And the Australian government, I know exactly who I need to reach out to. But again, so do the families. I think some other things that have happened, if we're talking about where we are currently, there's another multinational effort led by the Canadians who many years ago brought the Declaration Against State Hostage Taking, or an arbitrary detention rather, in state-to-state relations. So far, 79 countries and the European Union have signed on to this. Separately from that, there's another small grouping of about probably 12, 13, 14 countries that meet regularly to talk about actually taking action to thwart those who would take our hostages, and they're trying to recruit other countries. There's also an effort, also led by the Canadians, called the Independent International Panel on Arbitrary Detention. Think about 7 esteemed jurists who are getting together to survey all the laws and legal norms out there to determine where we have gaps and seams in our ability to fight against arbitrary detention. No, not the hostage side, but arbitrary detention. So these ongoing efforts that are making us better every day, but where the challenges that still arise is that there's still some ad hocery to this. There's not like a standing joint task force of people that get together and try to decrease the amount of diplomatic and military friction while increasing the amount of coordination. And you and I talked yesterday, there are things that we could probably do, or maybe we just need to be aware of each other, but we need to explore that side of the house. Secondly, I think we need to be very honest on where we are. The things that have changed, 5 years ago, if someone's loved one was taken hostage anywhere in the world, the family pretty much kept quiet. They were told by the government not to go public, to like take the pain by themselves, and never talk to the media. Well, now the reality is the families have come together. They're very vocal in the media. They're very vocal and good at pressuring the government. I don't think that's a bad thing. And then governments need to recognize that and embrace that as well. The media now follows this. When I took my job 5+ years ago, there were probably 4 reporters on earth that covered this topic. Now, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a reporter. Everyone's following this topic. And we also have to recognize that, and instead of being afraid of that as a government, we need to embrace that and find ways to work with that and try to make it work for us. So there are things that we can do. I would say the biggest things, though, is number one, let's have countries pick points of contact so we all can start working together and pick the phone up and coordinate. Number two, I think we need to work on the tools that allow us to fight against these things, and not just military or intelligence and the sanctioning tool. We need to be very expansive about exploring diplomatic tools, informational tools, intelligence, military, financial, law enforcement, all tools of national power should be explored to find extra tools that we could use to throw into these battles against these people that would take our citizens. But the biggest thing we can do is coordinate, and the dumbest thing we can do is forget that this ever happened, and 5 years from now when it happens again, I don't know who to call. The Americans famously master counterinsurgency every 40 years, and we always tell each other, we will never forget the lessons of this counterinsurgency. Start your watch. Within 5 years, we've forgotten everything that we've learned, and that's the thing that might happen here. We're trending in the right direction to beat the bad guys, and we will fail if we become distracted or forget that this happened and go our separate ways.
I believe it was Professor Gounod who first said it takes a network to fight a network. So no doubt we need to create this international community of experts that know how to deal with this threat when it happens. But you know, double click, coming from the large picture to our picture, you mentioned the family. In Israel, there is a kind of debate. The majority think that the voice of the family, the public voice, is essential and vital. But there are those who think that this might strengthen the Hamas. What do you think about it? No doubt, by the way, that it's strengthening the hostages. We have a lot of testimony from survivors that said, one of them, Eli Sharabi, just mentioned that one mention of the voice of the public, of the voice of the family, worth to him and 10 meals that he didn't receive anyway. So that's under no dispute. But what is your opinion regarding the role of the families, the public role in this issue of hostage release from terror organization?
So I mean, that's a great point, and it's if I were, I think in my younger days when I wanted to be diplomatic, I would say, well, some people say this, some people say that. I fall out here. But I'll firmly tell you that I think it's a good thing, and I respect those who would disagree with me on this topic. But when the families are involved, number one, we avoid moral injury. Can you imagine if your loved one was taken hostage and you wanted to do something, anything to get him out, but the government said, do nothing, we got this. And by the way, we're not going to tell you what's going on because it's all classified, and don't talk to the media. You would just sit there stewing in your juices, feeling that you're not doing everything to bring your loved one home, and that creates a moral injury for the person that's represented. Additionally, when everyone starts getting involved and the families get more interested in this, that results in the media finding out what's going on. That results in a massive amount of awareness, and frankly, that gives the government more tools. There's a really interesting book called We Want to Negotiate by Joel Simon, and in it he describes a situation where the French government had someone taken hostage in Africa, and everyone in France knew about this, and everyone in France was energized and excited to bring this person home. And the French government eventually brought this citizen home. What did they do to bring him home? I'm not sure. I don't think anyone will ever know, but the public did not question it because the public supported the government, and the government knew that. It's a little scary if the president of, say, the United States is offering to trade, say in our case, Victor Boot, the merchant of death, for Brittany Griner, and yet if the president knows that the families are interested, that the American public is supported, he's willing to take that risk. So the more that the families are involved, the more the media becomes involved. The more the media becomes involved, the more the government has a little more latitude to do what they need to do to bring someone home. Now, it doesn't always play out that way, and maybe this might be a specific example, but I think overall I see goodness with families being very engaged. And as the government, families would come up to me sometimes and say, well, Roger, if I go talk to CNN, won't that hurt our efforts to bring our loved ones home? And I would say, if I really believe that, I will beg you not to. But since I can't prove it, I'm the government. You do what you do, and I have, as the government, have to figure out how to get the job done regardless. And I think that's the responsibility. The families must do what they need to do, and then the government must still, because it's their responsibility, do what they must do. But I have to ask, what do you think?
A good question, which I prepared an answer, so it's a good one. You know, I remember, I think it was Professor Kasher, a well-known philosopher in Israel, that says that you don't have to do what I said, but it's very important that you will hear what I'm saying, what I said. And this is a way, my opinion, that the family voice is so important, it's so crucial, not only for them, not only for the hostage that that they're in captivity, but also for the whole nation. In a way, demonstrate the spirit of the nation, the standard, the value, the principle of the nation, and it is a good perception and good benchmark for government to think about, in addition to all strategic and geostrategy consideration. Coming into Gaza, there are also voices in Israel that say we are already, engaged in this war on Hamas for almost 2 years. We have 48 hostages already there for almost 2 years, held by Hamas. There are people saying in Israel that Hamas will never release the last hostage because Hamas will never give up the human shield around him. What is your opinion regarding this so crucial part of the art of releasing hostages, the last hostage?
So I've spent some time thinking about this, and I can say that this is probably the PhD level of hardness, trying to get someone back. And Hamas is probably the toughest, I would say, entity to negotiate with. I mean, if you think the Russians are hard, or I would say the Iranians are hard, I think Hamas, they're at the very highest level. And so it's hard to predict. And as you will know, because you had the same job that I did, you never really know. The variables are too many, and at any one point, the variables can come together and then scatter again in ways that are unpredictable. So I'll give you my opinion, and yet I could be entirely wrong. My sense is that you have to be an optimist in this business, and you have to say, it will get done. I don't know how. Right now, the tools aren't there. Right now, the conditions aren't set. But our job is to keep pushing and shaping the conditions to make it happen. I'm not sure how it's going to end, but I do believe that the last hostage will come back, that everyone who's alive comes back, everyone's remains comes back, the families all get closure, and somehow we put this behind us. How will we do that? Well, you and I talk about that all the time. What strategy will eventually put into place? I'm not entirely sure because I don't have a crystal ball. So what I can say, I think I know what the end state looks like. I don't really know how we're going to get there. But again, that's why people like you and I and the people who replaced us get paid the big bucks.
So let's anyway speak a bit about how we do it. I learned that in 1784 and 86, American sailors held hostages by pirates in North Africa. Decades after it, the new U.S. government paid $1 million. It was then 1/6 of the annual U.S. budget, 1/6, paid to release about 115 sailors held hostages. Few years after it, at 1801, when Thomas Jefferson became the president, he launched a war against these pirates, not only to secure the American trade all over the world, but also to demonstrate its responsibility, the nation's responsibility to its citizens, because the ransom continued to go, and Americans continued to hold hostages in this region of the world. So that was a great demonstration of the responsibility of a nation to its citizen, but also the use of two tools, the military power and the agreement, because at the end of this war, it was agreement of exchange of released hostages and prisoners, and that was it. What do you think about the military role? There are people in Israel that think that you can save or release hostages only by military force. Do you accept it?
I don't, and I think there is a very important role to play. It's a wonderful tool to have in your back pocket. At times, the military does take preeminence. I could probably bore you to death with a few other more modern examples of either Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, going into action to bring back a hostage. I think you could also rightfully give me a few examples of what your wonderful military's done, whether it's Flotilla 13 or whatever force. But I would say that if you could talk your way into getting a hostage back, why not? And would the United States send a platoon of SEALs on a very dangerous mission in some place like Somalia to save a citizen? Yes, we would, and yes, we have. But there are risks. You're putting people's lives at stake, and you don't really know how it's going to go. If you could perhaps talk to the other side to get the same result, but with no death, if you can use diplomacy and verbal acumen, why not give that a shot, knowing that the military tool is always in your back pocket? There were countries where At first, before I took the job, I'd say, we should send Delta Force in to get our hostages. And once you take the job, you realize the amount of drama that goes into making that happen. You can't just send a bunch of commandos in. You have to eventually take out portions of the other side's Navy, take out their air defense, take out their local, response mechanisms, kill a ton of their people, put civilians at risk, just to get people back. And by the way, if you save your American that's held in that country, well, in that country, there's probably about 500 or 600 Americans that are living there anyway, and so the bad guys will just go scoop them up. Little known fact, Iran, we have roughly, I think, 12 to 14,000 Americans living in Iran who are dual passport holders. They're American citizens and Iranians. So if we do something that we think is very extreme and very military to get a hostage back, well, they have roughly 12,000 more Americans to go grab up and throw into a prison. So if we can talk to the enemy out of what they have by diplomacy, that's not a bad way to go.
Yeah, no doubt that a surgical operation that we both of us know and have some experience are accurate enough and maybe have the odds to succeed. But I'm speaking about military campaign, the challenge of how to transfer military achievement to an agreement or negotiated agreement of releasing hostages. This is the challenge of the government. What do you know? What is your opinion about this very fragile and very challenging point of state that trying to take the military achievement of a military campaign, not a surgical operation, and transfer it or cash it into an agreement to release prisoners, release hostages?
Yeah, you know, it's I hope this doesn't come off as too cowardly in trying to avoid the question. I always find that there's information that I don't have, that if I had, I'd give you a more reasonable response. But there are lots of components to what's happening that I just don't know. I would say really that's the art of leadership. It's the ability to know when to shift it. And whether it's a hostage campaign or to shift from military action into a peace component, and I think about some of the wars that America's fought recently, that comes down to that general who, as Clausewitz says, sees that far distant light that the rest of us can't see and makes a decision, not always necessarily made on mathematics and on reason, but perhaps on intuition. I think when you're working on hostage issues or war or frankly love, there are certain topics out there that really defy mathematics. And this is one where the leaders in question have to embrace the unity of opposites. Man, God, the irrational, rational, becoming, to be able to wrestle with something that you understand and can put on paper as 1, 2, 3, and then wrestling with something that's more intuitive that goes on a gut feeling. And on this one, it's one of those things where you almost are glad you're not sitting in the chair of leadership. But I would say that there does come a moment that leaders need to be able to feel the battlefield, that Fingerspitzengefühl, second Clausewitz reference, Brian, if you could catch that. It's 2 now. That ability to feel the battlefield and know when it's time to shift from that military campaign into getting your hostages back. And that doesn't mean you can't do both in parallel, and that pressure is probably exactly what's needed. But you're right, as you correctly pointed, you have to be able to sense when that moment is and then strike.
Art of leadership and statesmanship. Very important word that I think many Israelis think about just this morning while seeing our troops having another operation, which is very important, and we really hope that it will cultivate the fruit that we all expected regarding the hostages. But it's exactly the point of clash between the moral or the values that all of us, there is no doubt, no clearer than that all countries feel responsible to the vulnerable and to the hostages and detainees. But then in clash with reality, with the state interest and state calculation, consideration, geostrategic consideration. What do you think about this clash? I think you gained the most vast experience in our time from anyone I know in exactly this junction, that in one hand you have the values, the moral issues, and the other hand, the national and the state interest.
You know, I think it's funny, I don't know if it was Jamie Rubin or Secretary Blinken that kind of coined this phrase, but they said that the moral hazard is overcome by the moral imperative. The moral hazard is that dangerous thing. It's letting go from a U.S. prison a bad guy so that we can get an innocent American. It's making that dangerous decision that you just made, that clash, that tension between the political interests of the state and getting a person home who just needs to come home because they belong to you. And I think that I always fall out, as I think Secretary Blinken did too, on that of the moral imperative. It's the government's duty to bring them home, and you have to be willing to accept some moral hazard. You and I as soldiers, what did we always do? Crazy dangerous stuff. But before we went into battle, we had to brief our bosses on risks, risk mitigation, and then your commander needed to decide whether he was willing to accept or find another way to buy down more risk. And it's not a risk-free world, and you know that. I mean, you've been on the front of either combat operations or negotiative operations, and it would be perfect if you were negotiating with someone who's going to give it all and you've bought down risk to zero, but that never happens. And every time I went into a negotiation, and every time I left it, at the end of the night, even after it succeeded, I was usually sick to my stomach, because going into the negotiation, it's going to just be brutal, and coming out of it, I got my American, but did I do the right thing? Because we took someone out of a U.S. prison, and we've turned him loose into society, and I hope he doesn't do anything bad now that he's home. Having said that, to my mind, the moral imperative outweighs the moral hazard.
I think it's exactly what it's worth it. It's worth it. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Carstens. I think it's exactly what we're trying to do in this specific clash between principle and power. We're trying to inject some soft power in trying to ease the clash and increase the odds and increase the alternatives. Last question. No doubt that we are now in the middle, in the center of the crisis in our region. What do you think can be the lesson learned from this crisis, hostage crisis, Israeli crisis in Gaza, to the world? And what do you think can be our lesson learned for the future from this event?
I could probably take this in 5 directions, but I'll try to keep it rather narrow. And that is, I think, and you and I talked about this a long time ago before the crisis happened, this is going to keep happening again. And whether it happens next year or whether it happens 3 years from now, expect it. Complex hostage crises. We talked about the Achille Laurel in 1984, where a big cruise ship was taken, and there were people from many different nationalities held hostage on this. And guess who was on mission to go save these hostages? Yes, this guy right here.
That's right.
Right?
With many Israelis, with many other Israelis, brave one.
I love that. He always gives credit to everyone else. That's a sign of a true leader. But I think the things that we got to learn are, look, we got to over-communicate with each other. We have to let down our guards, and so the United States needs to be open with our allies. I think as does Israel, as does the French, the Canadians, the Burmese, the Japanese. Yeah, if there's a company, Burmese, let me pull that off. Let's say the Bermudans. But we have to be better about over-communicating, working together, perhaps running tabletop exercises, as we did not too long ago when the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, working with the Sufan Group, actually ran tabletops where we tried to address calamitous hostage events. But we have to be better about knowing who to call, what to do, and trying to find ways to decrease, again, I'll say it again, decrease diplomatic and military friction while jacking up and increasing our coordination. We're at a decent point right now, and if we don't lose these lessons, the next time this happens, we'll know who to call, how to start it, and how to get it done. And militarily, we're so much better. In America, we created JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, a standing joint task force that allows us to deal with complex issues. Israel has a military entity like that. So do most countries. They kind of coordinate much better now. How about diplomatically? No. So when the militaries all come together, that's awesome. But the diplomats are going to be a part of that too. And if the diplomats are not, in a way, kind of thinking about these connections and this connectivity, we're going to be able to put these military forces together and exercise power across all elements of national power to get the job done. So what do we need to do? Keep up the coordination, in fact, ramp it up, and think about ways to increase our abilities to lower friction and increase cooperation.
Thank you, Ambassador Carstens. I mentioned, thank you. 1 minute. I mentioned before 1784, so I will go earlier to 1415 at the play of Shakespeare, Henry V. It was about the Agincourt battle, Henry leading the UK troops on a French soil, North French. They were outnumbered. He tried to encourage them, and he told them the quote from Shakespeare, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today who shed his blood with me shall be my brother." Thank you, Ambassador Carstens. Thank you, brother.
Thank you, too.
Thank you very